The billionaire Sheikh pretends to be gravely ill to test the loyalty of his staff, but nothing prepares him for the daring act of his maid's daughter that changes everything. Sheikh Amir al-Jamil had everything a man could dream of: towers that touched the clouds, a name that moved markets, and a fortune beyond measure. Yet behind the glass walls of his penthouse, he felt utterly alone. "Is there anyone," he whispered to his reflection, "who values the man, not the money?" That question became a plan, bold, dangerous, and deeply personal. "We'll tell them I'm dying," he told his doctor and lawyer. "Corticobasal degeneration, a disease that steals your mind and body inch by inch. I want to see who stays when the empire begins to fall." The doctor warned. "Amir, this could destroy you." "Then let it," the sheikh replied. "If loyalty can't survive a lie, it never existed." But he never imagined that the truth he sought would come not from his empire, but from a maid's young daughter. And what started as a test of loyalty ended as a revelation of truth. This is the story of how a billionaire's greatest deception revealed his only true treasure. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. A man worth billions decided his life was worthless until he found what money could not buy. Sheikh Amir al-Jamil, a titan of global industry, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, a lonely king surveying a kingdom of glass and steel. But for all his wealth, an unnerving silence echoed in his heart, a void no amount of success could fill. He decided it was time for one final, audacious venture, a test to uncover the truth hidden in the hearts of those who served him. The air in Sheikh Amir's penthouse was always perfectly conditioned, a cool and silent 72 degrees. It smelled faintly of aged leather from the custom-built library and the rare, unscented orchids that were replaced every 3 days. But for Amir, the air had grown stale, heavy with a loneliness that felt more suffocating than the city smog far below. He was a man who commanded armies of employees, who could shift global markets with a single phone call, but in his own home, he felt like a ghost, seen only for the fortune he represented. His hands, which had signed deals worth more than the GDP of small nations, now felt empty. He looked at his reflection in the pristine glass. A man in his late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen too much of the world's greed and too little of its kindness. His hair was a distinguished silver, his posture still proud, but inside, a part of him was tired. Tired of the smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the praise that dripped with ambition, the loyalty that was only as deep as his bank account. "Is there anyone?" he whispered to his reflection, the city lights twinkling back at him like a million unblinking eyes. "Who values the man, not the money?" The question had haunted him for months, festering after a former protege, a young man he had mentored and treated like a son, had been caught embezzling millions. The betrayal had cut deeper than any financial loss. It had confirmed his darkest fear, that he was surrounded by people who were simply waiting for their turn to take a piece of him. So, a plan had formed. A dangerous, painful, but necessary plan. He would pretend to be broken to see who would try to pick up the pieces, and who would simply try to run off with them. He called the only 2 men in the world he still trusted without reservation. The first was Dr. Alan Peterson, a friend from his university days who had become his personal physician. Alan was a man of quiet integrity, his face lined with the genuine concern he held for his patients. The second was Robert Davies, his lawyer for over 40 years, a sharp, shrewd man whose loyalty was as unshakable as a mountain. They met in Amir's private study, a room walled with books on history, philosophy, and art. The sheikh did not waste time with pleasantries. He sat them down in the deep leather armchairs across from his mahogany desk. "Alan, Robert," he began, his voice calm but firm, "I am going to stage my own decline." Dr. Peterson's eyebrows furrowed. "Amir, what are you talking about? Your latest checkup was perfect. You're healthier than men half your age." "My body may be healthy, Alan, but my spirit is sick with doubt," Amir replied, his gaze distant. "I want to pretend that I am unwell, not with something simple like a heart condition. I am thinking of something slow, something that will rob me of my faculties. A rare neurological disease. Something that will make me appear weak, confused, and eventually helpless." Robert Davies, who had been listening silently, leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on his client. This is a high-risk gamble, Amir. You want to see who remains loyal when the captain appears to be losing control of the ship. Precisely, Amir confirmed. I want to see the true faces of the people I have entrusted with my life's work. My chief of staff, Gregory. My financial advisor, Evelyn. My head of security, Bruce. All of them. They see me as invincible. I want to see how they behave when they think the fortress is about to fall. Dr. Peterson sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He understood his friend's pain. It can be done. I can draft a fake diagnosis. A progressive cognitive impairment. We can manage the symptoms with medication that has noticeable, but harmless, side effects. Tremors, occasional slurring of speech. It will be convincing. But what about your assets? Robert interjected, his legal mind already racing. If you appear incompetent, Gregory and Evelyn could try to seize control. They could argue for power of attorney. We need to protect you. That is where you come in, my friend, Amir said, a faint, sad smile on his lips. I want you to let them believe they are making progress. Let them think they are outsmarting a dying old man. I will be moving a significant portion of my liquid assets into a blind trust that only you and I can access. Let them fight over the scraps they think is the entire feast. I want to give them enough rope, you know the rest. The lawyer nodded slowly. I will put safeguards in place. It will be a quiet war of documents and deception. They won't know they've lost until the very end. Good, Amir said, feeling a sliver of resolve cutting through his melancholy. The performance begins next week. Alan, you will call a private meeting with my senior staff. Tell them the devastating news. And Robert, you will be my eyes and ears. I will be watching from the shadows of my own home. And so, the stage was set. The billionaire Sheikh would become a frail old man. The audience would be his most trusted staff, and the play would be a tragedy of greed and betrayal. He only hoped he would find at least one actor whose performance was not a lie. A week later, the atmosphere in Sheikh Amir's executive conference room was thick with tension. The room itself was a monument to power, with a long, polished marble table and panoramic views of the city. Usually, these meetings were a display of sharp minds and confident strategies. Today, there was only a dreadful silence. Dr. Alan Peterson stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of professional sorrow. Across from him sat the three pillars of Amir's inner circle. Gregory Thompson, the chief of staff, was a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His ambition was a palpable force, a sharp, hungry energy that he usually masked with a veneer of flawless professionalism. He sat perfectly still, his hands clasped, but his eyes were darting, calculating. Beside him was Evelyn Reed, the chief financial officer. She was a severe woman with sharp features and an even sharper mind. Her expression was one of controlled concern, but behind her glasses, her mind was a whirlwind of numbers and clauses, already assessing the financial implications of whatever was to come. And then there was Bruce Miller, the head of security. A broad, imposing man built like a former linebacker, Bruce's loyalty was supposed to be absolute. He looked genuinely troubled, his brow furrowed, but his discomfort was that of a man whose stable, predictable world was about to be shaken. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Dr. Peterson began, his voice heavy. He let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. I am here today as Sheikh Amir's personal physician. I'm afraid the news I have is difficult. He paused again, letting the gravity of his words sink in. For the past few months, the Sheikh has been undergoing a series of private tests. He has been experiencing episodes of confusion, memory loss, and fatigue. We have finally reached a diagnosis. Dr. Peterson looked each of them in the eye. The Sheikh has been diagnosed with corticobasal degeneration. It is a rare, progressive neurological disorder. There is no cure. The room was utterly still. Gregory was the first to speak, his voice a carefully crafted blend of shock and concern. My God, how progressive is it? The progression varies from person to person, Dr. Peterson explained, sticking to the script. But it is inevitable. His cognitive functions will decline. His motor skills will deteriorate. He will have good days and bad days, but the overall trajectory is downward. We can manage the symptoms, but we cannot stop the disease. Evelyn Reed pushed her glasses up her nose. What does this mean for the company? For his ability to lead? She asked, her tone clinical. He will be stepping back from day-to-day operations immediately, the doctor said. he needs to avoid stress. On his good days, he may be lucid and able to offer guidance. On his bad days, he will need quiet and rest. He has asked that you, his most trusted team, ensure the stability of his empire. Bruce Miller finally spoke, his gruff voice low. Does he need extra protection? Is he vulnerable? He will be vulnerable in many ways, Dr. Peterson said, looking pointedly at the three of them. He will need your loyalty now more than ever. He is counting on you to protect his legacy. The meeting concluded a few minutes later. The three of them walked out of the conference room, their footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. As soon as they were out of the doctor's earshot, the facade of grief began to crumble. I can't believe it, Gregory said, though his eyes held a glint of something other than sadness. It was the flicker of opportunity. The old lion finally slowing down. We need a transition plan, Evelyn stated, all business. The markets will be volatile if word of this gets out. We need to control the narrative. We need to consolidate power. I'll double the security on his floor, Bruce added. No one in or out without my approval. For his safety, of course. They all nodded, a silent, unholy trinity of ambition. They thought they were discussing how to protect a dying man. In reality, they were vultures beginning to circle, each of them eyeing the prize for themselves. Upstairs in his penthouse, Sheikh watched the recording of the meeting on a hidden monitor. He saw the feigned shock, the calculating glances, the barely concealed hunger in their eyes. He felt a familiar coldness seep into his bones. The performance had begun. Later that day, the first true signs of his illness appeared. When his personal chef brought him his lunch, Amir stared at the fork for a long moment, as if he had forgotten its purpose. He fumbled with it, his hand trembling slightly, a side effect of the harmless medication Alan had prescribed. He looked up at the chef, his eyes filled with a manufactured confusion. Thank you, he mumbled, his speech just a little slurred. You may go. The chef left, his face a picture of pity. The news was already spreading through the household staff like wildfire. The invincible Sheikh was fading. That afternoon, a different presence entered his quiet, lonely world. Karen, one of the maids, was a quiet woman who had worked for him for 5 years. She always did her job efficiently and disappeared without a word. But today, she was not alone. Holding her hand was a small girl of about 10, with bright, curious blue eyes and a cascade of blonde hair. This was her daughter, Chloe. Her school had an unexpected half-day, and Karen, a single mother with no other options, had been forced to bring her to work. She had instructed her daughter to sit quietly in a corner of the staff kitchen and not to disturb anyone. But Chloe was a curious child. While her mother was cleaning in another room, she tiptoed out and peered down the long, silent corridor leading to the Sheikh's private quarters. The door was slightly ajar. She saw the old man sitting in a large armchair by the window, looking out at the city. He looked incredibly sad, like the lonely old king in one of her storybooks. He wasn't the powerful Sheikh everyone whispered about. He just looked like a grandpa who needed a hug. Without thinking, she walked into the room. Amir heard the soft footsteps and turned his head slowly. He saw the small girl standing there, holding a slightly crumpled piece of paper in her hand. Hello, he said, his voice soft. He kept up his act, letting his hand tremble as he gestured to a nearby stool. Chloe didn't seem to notice the tremor. She just saw his sad eyes. She walked over and held out the piece of paper. It was a drawing, made with crayons. It showed a big, smiling sun with bright yellow rays. This is for you, she said in a small voice. My mom says you're not feeling well. My great-grandpa always said that a little bit of sunshine helps everything. Amir took the drawing. His fingers brushed against hers. For the first time in a very long time, he felt a touch that was not transactional, a gesture that asked for nothing in return. He looked at the simple, childish drawing, and a strange warmth spread through his chest, a feeling more powerful than any deal he had ever closed. Thank you, he whispered, and for the first time, the words were not part of an act. Thank you very much, little one. He didn't know it yet, but the truest part of his test had just begun, and the one person he had never thought to test would be the only one to pass. Days bled into weeks, and Sheikh Amir's grand performance continued. He committed to his role with the same discipline that had built his empire. He would spend hours in his chair, sometimes staring blankly at a wall, other times fumbling with a book as if the words were foreign symbols. He allowed his hand to tremble, his voice to waver, and his steps to become slow and uncertain. The staff saw a giant turning to dust, and their behavior began to change in subtle, then obvious, ways. Gregory Thompson, the ever-ambitious chief of staff, began to inhabit the Sheikh's world as if it were already his own. He started using Amir's private elevator. He held meetings in the Sheikh's personal study, sitting in the high-backed leather chair that had been Amir's throne for decades. He spoke of Amir in the past tense, telling business partners, "The Sheikh always believed in aggressive expansion. I am merely continuing his vision." He saw himself not as a steward, but as the heir apparent. One afternoon, Gregory strode into the penthouse unannounced, followed by two designers carrying fabric swatches and blueprints. He found Amir sitting by the window, a blanket over his legs. "Sir," Gregory said, his voice loud and patronizing, as if speaking to a child, "we're just here to discuss some minor renovations for the executive floor. Freshening the place up. You don't need to worry about a thing." Amir looked up, his eyes clouded with feigned confusion. "Renovations?" he mumbled. I like the office." "Of course you did, sir. It's a wonderful office," Gregory said with a dismissive smile. "This will just be an upgrade. A new era." He then turned to the designers, completely ignoring Amir, and began pointing at the blueprints. "I want this wall gone. Open concept. More light. A reflection of a more forward-thinking leadership." Amir watched them, a silent storm of anger brewing beneath his placid exterior. He was a ghost in his own home, a living relic whose legacy was being dismantled before his very eyes. Evelyn Reed was more subtle, but far more dangerous. Her weapon was not a sledgehammer, but a fountain pen. She began producing stacks of documents for Amir to sign, describing them as routine quarterly filings or minor trust adjustments for tax efficiency. She would guide his trembling hand to the signature line, her voice a soothing murmur. "Just here, Sheikh Amir. It's all standard procedure to protect your assets," she would say. Amir, with a mind still as sharp as a razor, would pretend to struggle, to not understand. But he saw the truth in the fine print. She was creating new corporate shells, transferring ownership of smaller, non-essential assets into companies where her own relatives were listed as board members. She was carving off pieces of his empire, a death by 1,000 cuts, confident that the befuddled old man would never notice. His lawyer, Robert Davies, was tracking every move, letting her build a cage of evidence around herself. Bruce Miller, the head of security, showed his disloyalty through neglect. The man who was supposed to be a bulldog guarding the gate had become a lazy hound sleeping in the sun. The strict security protocols around the penthouse loosened. Visitors who were once vetted for weeks were now waved through on Gregory's say-so. Bruce began using the company's armored vehicles for weekend fishing trips, justifying it as security route analysis. He was being paid a king's ransom to protect a man he now saw as a mere figurehead. Through all this, Amir watched. The hidden cameras in his rooms were his silent companions, recording every condescending word, every treacherous signature, every dereliction of duty. Each night, he would review the footage, his heart growing heavier with each betrayal. The grand penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a gilded cage full of serpents. But amidst the venom, there was an antidote. A small, 10-year-old girl with hair the color of sunshine. Chloe continued to visit. Her mother, Karen, was nervous at first, constantly telling her daughter not to bother the Sheikh. But Amir had insisted. He told Karen that the girl's presence was a comfort. Chloe never seemed to notice the Sheikh's supposed decline. She didn't see a sick man. She saw a friend. She would bring him little gifts from her world, a shiny rock she found in the park, a feather from a blue jay, a book of riddles from her school library. One day, she arrived with a small, worn, leather-bound book. "This was my great-grandpa's," she said, her voice full of reverence. She sat on the stool beside his chair, her small feet barely touching the floor. His name was Sergeant Michael Donovan. He was a war hero. Amir leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "Tell me about him." "He fought in a big war a long, long time ago," Chloe explained, her blue eyes wide and serious. "He was very brave. He saved his whole platoon when they were trapped. They gave him a big medal for it." She paused, then added, "But he always said the medal wasn't the important thing. He said the only thing that mattered was that his men knew he would never leave them behind." She opened the book. It was a collection of poems. He used to read this to me. He said words were sometimes stronger than bullets. He had a favorite saying. My mom wrote it down for me, so I wouldn't forget. She pulled a small, folded piece of paper from her pocket and read it aloud carefully. Loyalty is the only currency that never loses its value. The words struck Amir with the force of a physical blow. Here was a 10-year-old girl, the descendant of a humble war hero, articulating the very principle he had built his life on, the very thing he now found so painfully absent. He looked from Chloe's earnest face to the city skyline outside. He had amassed a fortune in every currency on earth, but he was bankrupt in the one that truly mattered. From that day on, their bond deepened. Chloe would read to him from her great-grandfather's book of poems. Her clear, young voice filled the silent room, a stark contrast to the whispered conspiracies that took place just outside his door. She didn't want his money. She didn't want his power. She just wanted to share a story with her sad, old friend. One afternoon, as she was reading, Amir's hand began to tremble more violently than usual, an actual side effect of the medication that day. He tried to pick up a glass of water and spilled it down his shirt. He felt a flash of genuine embarrassment. Gregory and Evelyn, who had just entered the room to discuss some urgent paperwork, saw the spill and exchanged a look of pity and disgust. "Oh dear," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Let me get one of the staff to clean that up." But before she could move, Chloe put her book down. She ran to the small kitchenette in the suite, grabbed a cloth, and came back. She didn't say a word. She just gently dabbed the water from his shirt, her small face a picture of concentration and care. "It's okay," she whispered, looking up at him with a reassuring smile. "It's just water. It will dry." In that small, simple act of kindness, Sheikh Amir felt a profound shift. Gregory and Evelyn saw a mess to be cleaned up by someone else. Chloe saw a person who needed help. He looked at his two senior executives, standing there with their pens and their plans, their eyes cold and calculating. Then he looked down at the little girl, who was now straightening the blanket on his lap. He had started this test to find the snakes in his garden. He never expected to find a single, beautiful, resilient flower growing in their midst. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would do anything to protect it. The moment was a perfect tableau of the battle for Sheikh Amir's soul. On one side stood Gregory and Evelyn, symbols of a world that was cold, transactional, and impatient for him to fade away. On the other, a small child with a cleaning cloth, offering simple, unvarnished kindness without a thought for personal gain. Amir looked at the scene, and for the first time since this charade began, he felt not anger, but a profound sense of clarity. He knew what he was fighting for. It wasn't just his company or his fortune. It was for the idea that loyalty and love, the currency of Sergeant Michael Donovan and his great-granddaughter, still had value in the world. "Thank you, Chloe," Amir said, his voice imbued with a genuine warmth that momentarily startled the two executives. He placed his hand over hers on the cloth. "You have a good heart." Gregory cleared his throat, impatient with the sentimental display. "Sir, if we could just get your signature on these investment authorizations. It's time-sensitive." He slid a sleek leather-bound folder onto the table next to Amir. Amir slowly turned his head, his gaze now carefully vacant again. He stared at the folder as if it were an alien object. "Signing," he repeated, his voice frail. "My hand, it shakes so much today." "Not to worry," Evelyn said, stepping forward with a practiced, predatory grace. She produced a silver pen. "I can help guide your hand, sir. It's just a formality." She reached for his hand, her long, manicured fingers cold against his skin. But before she could close his fingers around the pen, Chloe spoke up. "My great-grandpa said you should never sign anything you haven't read 3 times, she said, not with accusation, but with the simple, unwavering conviction of a child repeating a sacred rule. Evelyn froze. Her head snapped toward Chloe, her eyes narrowing with annoyance. "That's very wise, dear," she said, her voice tight. "But this is grown-up business. The Sheikh trusts us to read things for him. But it's his name," Chloe insisted quietly. "It's like a promise. My great-grandpa promised to bring his men home, and he did. He said a signature is the same thing." A tense silence filled the room. Gregory shot Evelyn a look that said, "Get this child out of here." Amir, meanwhile, felt a surge of admiration. This little girl, armed only with the wisdom of a long-dead soldier, had thrown a wrench into their carefully laid plans. He slowly pulled his hand back from Evelyn's grasp. "The girl is right," he slurred, letting his head loll slightly to the side. "So much reading makes my head hurt. Tomorrow. We will sign tomorrow." Gregory's jaw clenched, but he could not argue without revealing his true intentions. Forcing a sick man to sign legal documents was a bad look, especially with a witness in the room, even if she was only 10. "Of course, sir," he said, forcing a smile. "As you wish. Your health is what's most important." They retreated, defeated for the moment. As they walked down the hall, their whispers were sharp and angry. "We have to get that brat out of there," Evelyn hissed. "She's a complication." "I'll talk to her mother," Gregory replied, his voice cold. "Remind her of the terms of her employment. This is a place of business, not a daycare." Amir watched them go, then looked down at Chloe, who had returned to her book of poems. He felt a fierce, protective instinct rise within him. They saw her as a complication. He was beginning to see her as his salvation. The next day, Karen, Chloe's mother, approached the Sheikh, her face pale with worry. She was twisting her hands in her apron, unable to meet his eyes. "Your Excellency," she began, her voice trembling. "I am so sorry for my daughter. She overstepped. Mr. Thompson explained that she is a distraction. I will not bring her again." Amir had been expecting this. He knew Gregory would move quickly to remove the one honest person in the room. He softened his expression, adopting the persona of a lonely old man. "No," he said, his voice a soft plea. "Please. The child, she is a comfort. Her reading, it soothes me. The silence in this big place, it is too loud." He let his hand tremble as he reached out to her. "I insist. I will speak to Mr. Thompson myself. I will tell him that I have requested her presence." Karen looked up, her eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. "Truly, sir. Truly," Amir confirmed. "Let her stay? I need a friend." The lie was so close to the truth that it felt real. He didn't need a friend. And this 10-year-old girl was the only one he had. With the Sheikh's direct order, Gregory and Evelyn had no choice but to tolerate Chloe's presence. But their frustration grew, and with it, their recklessness. They saw the fortune slipping through their fingers, delayed by the whims of a child and the unpredictable lucidity of a dying man. They decided they needed to accelerate their plan. They needed to secure power of attorney, the key that would unlock the entire kingdom. Robert Davies, the lawyer, had prepared for this. He had drafted a document that, on the surface, appeared to grant Gregory and Evelyn sweeping control over Amir's assets. But buried deep within the legalese was a self-destruct clause. The power of attorney would only become active upon the signature of a 3-person medical panel, and one of those doctors was a trusted ally of Robert's who would never sign. It was a Trojan horse, designed to look like a gift, but destined to seal their doom. The conspirators took the bait. Evelyn spent 2 days simplifying the document, presenting it to Amir as a way to reduce his burdens. "This just allows Gregory and me to handle the day-to-day financial matters, sir," she explained, her voice as smooth as honey. "It's a temporary measure, only while you're not feeling your best. It protects you." They chose a day when Amir seemed particularly weak. Dr. Peterson had adjusted his medication to make the side effects, the tremors and the slurred speech, more pronounced. They found him in the library, staring out the window, looking frail and lost. Chloe was not there yet. Her mother had taken her to a dental appointment. It was the perfect opportunity. "Sir," Gregory said, placing the document and a pen on the table in front of him. "Evelyn has prepared the protective paperwork we discussed. It's ready for your signature." Amir stared at the paper. He squinted, pretending the words were a blur. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking so much that the tip danced across the page. This was the moment. He had to sign it to spring the trap, but he also had to make it look convincing. He brought the pen to the paper, then let it drop from his fingers. I can't," he whispered, his voice thick with manufactured despair. "My hand won't obey." Evelyn and Gregory exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. This was even better than they had hoped. If he was physically incapable of signing, they could petition a judge to grant them control based on his obvious incapacitation. "It's all right, sir," Evelyn said, her voice full of false pity. "Don't trouble yourself. We understand." They took the unsigned document and left. confident that they now had all the ammunition they needed. They immediately called their own lawyer, a man known for his ruthless efficiency, and started proceedings to have Amir declared mentally incompetent. They believed they were just a few legal maneuvers away from total victory. They had no idea that Robert Davies was monitoring their every move, letting them walk deeper and deeper into the legal labyrinth he had constructed. While the corporate wolves were closing in, a different drama was unfolding among the household staff. A young valet named Thomas had worked for the Sheikh for 10 years. He revered Amir, who had personally paid for his mother's expensive surgery years ago, an act of kindness the young man had never forgotten. Thomas was quiet and observant, and he saw things. He saw the way Gregory sat in the Sheikh's chair. He saw the glee in Evelyn's eyes when she thought no one was watching. He overheard Bruce on the phone, laughing about taking the Sheikh's Rolls-Royce for a joyride. His loyalty gnawed at him. One evening, after helping the Sheikh with his dinner, Thomas lingered at the door. "Is there something on your mind, son?" Amir asked, his voice clear for a moment. He had seen the worry in the young man's eyes for weeks. Thomas took a deep breath. "Sir, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but I'm worried about you. About what's happening." Amir looked at him, his gaze sharp and lucid, dropping the act for a moment. "What have you seen, Thomas?" "Mr. Thompson, he acts as if he already owns the place. And Ms. Reed, she is always with the lawyers. And Bruce, the security is a joke, sir. They are not protecting you. They are isolating you." He wrung his hands, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think they are taking advantage of your illness, sir. I think they are robbing you." It was the first crack in the wall of silence. The first person to risk his own livelihood to speak the truth. Amir felt a surge of gratitude. "Your loyalty is noted, Thomas," Amir said, his voice soft but firm. "And it will be rewarded. For now, I need you to continue to watch and listen. Be my eyes and ears among the staff. But be careful. These are dangerous people. Do not let them know we have spoken." Thomas nodded, a look of profound relief on his face. He left the room feeling 10 feet tall. He wasn't just a valet anymore. He was a secret soldier, serving the king he thought was lost. Amir now had 2 allies in his lonely castle, a loyal valet and a 10-year-old girl. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. It was a flicker of light in the encroaching darkness. The next afternoon, Chloe returned. She was quiet, her usual bright energy dimmed. She sat on her stool and didn't open her book. "What's wrong, little one?" Amir asked gently. "My mom is worried," Chloe said, looking at her shoes. She heard some of the staff talking. "They said that Mr. Thompson is going to put you in a special hospital, a place for sick old people. They said you won't be living here anymore." Amir's blood ran cold. This was a new development. They weren't just trying to seize his assets. They were planning to remove him entirely, to lock him away where he could no longer be a nuisance, a witness to their crimes. They were going to bury him alive. He looked at Chloe's worried face, and his resolve hardened into steel. He had started this test out of a sense of melancholy and doubt. Now, it was no longer a game. It was a war, and he would be damned if he let them win. He would not let them harm the one person who had shown him what true wealth really was. He reached out and patted her hand. "Don't you worry," he said, his voice low and steady. "My great-grandfather was a soldier too, and he taught me that you never, ever surrender your home." Chloe looked up, a small smile returning to her face. She didn't understand the details, but she understood the promise in his eyes. Her friend wasn't going anywhere. The final act was about to begin. Gregory and Evelyn, armed with their petition and a team of unscrupulous doctors, were preparing to make their final move. They thought they were about to checkmate a fallen king. They had no idea they were walking into the king's trap, where his queen, his knight, and his rook were all patiently waiting. The storm was about to break over the penthouse, and when it did, the entire world would learn the true value of loyalty. The final confrontation was set to take place not in a cold, impersonal courtroom, but in the heart of Sheikh Amir's own territory, the grand library of his penthouse. Gregory and Evelyn, supremely confident, had arranged for a private competency hearing. They had hired 2 doctors who, for a hefty price, were willing to testify that the Sheikh was a shadow of his former self, incapable of managing his own affairs. They had even managed to get a judge, a man with a reputation for being swayed by powerful interests, to preside over the informal hearing. They saw it as the final, elegant checkmate. The morning of the hearing, The atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with a funereal quiet. Bruce Miller stood guard at the door of the library, his face a grim, unreadable mask. Inside, Gregory and Evelyn had arranged the chairs. Two for their doctors, one for the judge, and a large, comfortable one for the Sheikh, placed in the center of the room like a throne for a deposed king. They sent a nurse to fetch Amir. He allowed himself to be led into the room, his steps slow and shuffling, a look of bewilderment on his face. He sank into the chair, the very picture of a man lost to the fog of his illness. He saw the smug, predatory smiles on the faces of his most trusted advisors and felt a cold, hard knot of fury tighten in his gut. The judge, a portly man named Harrison, began the proceedings. This is an informal hearing to assess the ongoing cognitive health of Sheikh Amir al-Jamil and to determine if a temporary conservatorship is in the best interests of his estate. Gregory spoke first, his voice oozing with a carefully rehearsed sorrow. Your Honor, it is with the heaviest of hearts that we are here today. Sheikh Amir has been a mentor, a leader, a father figure to us all. But as his physician, Dr. Peterson, can attest, his condition has deteriorated rapidly. He is no longer the man he was. We are here only to protect him, to protect his legacy. Evelyn then presented a mountain of documents. The unsigned power of attorney, financial reports she had doctored to look chaotic, and affidavits from her hired doctors. The doctors then gave their expert opinions, using complex medical jargon to paint a picture of a man whose mind was irretrievably broken. Amir sat through it all, his expression placid, his hands trembling slightly in his lap. He played his part to perfection, occasionally mumbling a confused word or staring off into space. Gregory and Evelyn were exultant. It was all going exactly as planned. It seems clear, Judge Harrison said, looking down at Amir with a dismissive air of pity, that the Sheikh is not in a position to manage his own affairs. I am inclined to grant the petition for temporary conservatorship to Mr. Thompson and Ms. Reed. He was about to make his ruling when the Grand Library doors swung open. Robert Davies, Amir's lawyer, strode into the room. He was not an imposing man physically, but he radiated an aura of unshakable authority. He was followed by two paralegals carrying heavy briefcases. Your Honor, Robert said, his voice cutting through the room like a shard of ice. I believe this hearing is premature, and, I might add, founded on a bed of lies. Gregory leaped to his feet. Robert, this is a private matter. Your presence is not required. Oh, I think it is, Robert said calmly, walking to the center of the room. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, my client, Sheikh Amir, is the victim of a coordinated conspiracy to defraud him of his assets and his liberty. A plot orchestrated by the very two people petitioning for control. A shocked murmur went through the room. Evelyn's face went pale. This is an outrage, she sputtered. He's a desperate lawyer trying to maintain his influence over a sick man. Is he sick? Robert asked, turning to face Amir. Or is he the shrewdest man in this room? And then, it happened. Sheikh Amir al-Jamil straightened his back. The tremor in his hands ceased. He lifted his head, and the vacant, confused look in his eyes was replaced by a piercing, intelligent glare that had made corporate titans tremble for 50 years. He looked directly at Gregory and Evelyn, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to suck the air out of the room. Hello, Gregory. Evelyn, he said, his voice no longer slurred or weak, but a deep, resonant baritone that echoed with power. Surprised to see me? The transformation was so sudden, so total, that for a moment, everyone was stunned into silence. The two hired doctors looked at each other in panic. Judge Harrison's jaw dropped. Gregory and Evelyn looked as if they had seen a ghost, a very angry, very articulate ghost. But, your illness. Dr. Peterson, Gregory stammered, his mind reeling. Dr. Peterson is an old and loyal friend who helped me stage a performance. Amir explained, rising slowly from his chair. He was no longer a frail old man. He was a king reclaiming his throne. A performance designed to reveal the true nature of the people around me. And you too, you have exceeded my darkest expectations. Robert Davies stepped forward and placed a laptop on the table, connecting it to a large screen on the wall. Your Honor, we have evidence. For the next hour, they watched in stunned silence. Hidden camera footage showed Gregory in the Sheikh's office, boasting to designers about his new era of leadership. It showed Evelyn guiding Amir's hand to sign documents, whispering soothing lies about their content. It showed Bruce Miller laughing on the phone about using company resources for his personal pleasure. Then came the financial records. Robert Davies displayed a clear, irrefutable trail of embezzlement, showing how Evelyn had siphoned millions into offshore accounts and shell companies controlled by her family. He showed proof of Gregory's attempts to sell off company assets at a fraction of their value to a competitor with whom he had a secret partnership. The final piece of evidence was a sworn statement from Thomas, the valet, detailing the culture of disrespect and theft that had festered among the senior staff. When the presentation was over, the library was utterly silent. The faces of Gregory and Evelyn were masks of horror and disbelief. They were trapped, exposed, and utterly ruined. Amir walked slowly toward them, his steps measured and heavy. He stopped in front of Gregory. "You sat in my chair," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You tried to erase my legacy. You saw my supposed weakness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. You are a man of no substance, no honor, and no loyalty." He then turned to Evelyn. "And you were even worse. You pretended to care. You used a gentle touch to guide my hand while you were sticking a knife in my back. Of all the betrayals, yours is the most contemptible." He looked at Bruce, who was now trembling by the door. "And you, Bruce, I paid you to protect me. Instead, you guarded the hen house for the foxes. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore." Suddenly, the library doors opened again. This time, it was Karen, Chloe's mother. She looked terrified, having been summoned by a staff member with no explanation. Chloe was holding her hand, her eyes wide with confusion and fear at the scene before her. Gregory saw them and, in a last, desperate act of malice, he pointed a trembling finger at the child. "This is her fault. If it wasn't for that distracting little pest, our plan would have worked." Amir's fury, which had been a controlled burn, erupted into a towering inferno. He took 2 long strides and stood directly in front of Gregory, his eyes blazing. "You will not speak of her," he commanded, his voice shaking with rage. "That little girl, in her innocence and her simple decency, showed more loyalty and honor in one afternoon than you have shown in your entire parasitic life." He turned and walked toward Chloe, his expression softening as he knelt before her. The powerful Sheikh, who had just dismantled 3 traitors, was now on his knee before a 10-year-old girl. "Chloe," he said gently, taking her small hand. "Do you remember what you told me your great-grandpa used to say? The one about loyalty being the only currency that never loses its value." Chloe nodded, still a little scared. "Well, he was right," Amir said, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent my life collecting every other kind of currency. But I was poor, the poorest man in the world. You, in your great-grandfather's memory, you made me rich again." He stood up and faced the room. "This hearing is over. Gregory Thompson, Evelyn Reed, Bruce Miller, you are fired. Your assets will be frozen, and you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Security will escort you from the premises. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your backs." As security, led by a newly promoted and resolute Thomas, came to take them away, Amir made one final announcement. "As for the future," he said, his voice ringing with renewed purpose, "there will be some changes. My first act is to establish the Sergeant Michael Donovan Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to supporting war veterans and their families. It will be funded with every single dollar that Evelyn Reed tried to steal from me, and then some." He paused, and then he looked at Karen and Chloe, a warm, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in years. "Karen," he said, "I would be honored if you would accept the position of head of household affairs. And I would like to offer you and Chloe a permanent residence here, in the penthouse. There is more than enough room." Karen gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Amir said softly. "This house needs a family. It needs the sunshine that your daughter brings." And she did. 1 year later. 12 months. 365 days. A mere tick on the clock of a lifetime. Yet for Sheikh Amir al-Jamil, it was an eternity. The man who stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows now was so fundamentally different from the one who had surveyed his lonely kingdom a year prior that they might have been 2 separate souls. The ghost was gone, replaced by a man firmly, joyfully rooted in the present. The grand penthouse, once a silent museum of wealth, now breathed with life. The sterile quiet had been chased away by the sound of Chloe's laughter echoing down the marble halls, the scent of Karen's homestyle baking occasionally mingling with the rare orchids, and the lively chatter of Amir explaining the rules of chess to a very serious 10-year-old. The staff, now led by the ever-loyal and competent Karen, no longer walked on eggshells. They smiled. They felt part of a home, not just a workplace. Thomas, the valet who had risked everything, was now Amir's personal aide and head of administration, his quiet integrity proving more valuable than any Ivy League MBA. He was a constant, steady presence at Amir's side, a living reminder that loyalty was not dead. Amir's days were no longer a monotonous march of meetings and market reports. His mornings were often spent in what was now dubbed the Foundation Office, a sunlit corner of the library dedicated to the Sergeant Michael Donovan Foundation. He didn't just sign checks. He was deeply, passionately involved. He read the grant applications himself, his eyes welling up as he learned of the struggles and triumphs of the men and women who had served their country. He and Chloe would often visit the Foundation's flagship project, a state-of-the-art community center for veterans and their families. It offered everything from job training and PTSD counseling to after-school programs for children. One crisp autumn afternoon, Amir stood with Chloe in the center's bustling gymnasium, watching a group of children whose parents were in therapy sessions play basketball. A veteran in a wheelchair, a man who had lost both legs in a conflict a decade ago, was coaching them, his face alight with purpose. He caught Amir's eye and gave him a grateful nod. In that single, silent gesture, Amir felt a sense of accomplishment more profound than any billion-dollar merger. He leaned down to Chloe, who was watching with wide, admiring eyes. "You see, little one," he whispered. "Your great-grandfather is still saving his platoon. His legacy isn't in a medal stored in a dusty box. It's here, in this room, in their lives." Chloe had blossomed in her new environment. Freed from the constant worry of her mother's financial struggles, her natural intelligence and curiosity flourished. The finest tutors were provided, but her favorite teacher remained the Sheikh himself. He taught her about history by telling her stories of the places he'd traveled. He taught her about business by showing her how to read a balance sheet, explaining that numbers tell a story, but you must make sure it's an honest one. But most of all, they were simply friends. They built elaborate Lego castles on the Persian rugs, held movie marathons with too much popcorn, and had long, rambling conversations about everything from astrophysics to whether squirrels remembered where they buried all their nuts. She had given him the gift of a second childhood, a chance to experience the simple joys his relentless ambition had denied him the first time around. As for the architects of his near ruin, their fall was as swift as it was absolute. The evidence Robert Davies had compiled was irrefutable. Gregory Thompson and Evelyn Reed were convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and a host of other white-collar crimes. The judge, Harrison, having been publicly embarrassed and investigated for his own questionable conduct, made an example of them. They were sentenced to decades in federal prison. Stripped of their ill-gotten gains, their names became a cautionary tale in the business world, a permanent stain of disgrace. Bruce Miller, convicted on lesser charges of theft and dereliction of duty, received a shorter sentence, but emerged a broken man, his reputation and career shattered forever. They had gambled everything for a fortune and lost, only to discover in the stark emptiness of a prison cell that they had forfeited the one thing they could never get back, their honor. The company, Al Jamil Global, thrived under its new leadership. With Thomas ensuring the Sheikh's new ethical mandate was implemented at every level, and a new, carefully vetted executive team, the corporate culture was transformed. Innovation flourished, employee morale soared, and profits reached record highs. The business world watched in amazement as the old lion, once thought to be fading, came roaring back, stronger and more respected than ever. One evening, exactly a year after the hearing, Amir and Chloe stood by the same floor-to-ceiling window where the story had begun. The city lights twinkled below, the same unblinking eyes. But they were no longer a cold, lonely audience. They were a beautiful backdrop to a scene of quiet contentment. Chloe's latest drawing, a picture of a smiling old man and a little girl holding hands next to a large, friendly-looking lion, was taped to the glass. "What are you thinking about, Amir?" Chloe asked, her head resting against his side. Amir looked down at her, his heart full. He remembered the desperate, lonely man who had stood in this very spot, a man so impoverished in spirit that he had to stage a desperate play to find a single shred of truth. He had been looking for snakes, and he had found them. But he had also found an angel. "I was thinking," he said, his voice soft, "about a very foolish old king who thought his treasure was made of gold and paper." He gently squeezed her shoulder. "And I was thinking about the wise little girl who came and showed him that a real treasure is something you can hold in your heart." He pointed to the drawing. "That is my most valuable asset now." He had set out to test the world and had ended up rediscovering himself. He learned that a life's true measure is not in the billions you accumulate, but in the love you inspire and the loyalty you earn. He had pretended to be sick to see who would stay, and in the end, the unwavering faith of a child with a hero's blood in her veins had not just changed his life, it had saved it. The billionaire Sheikh was finally, truly, the wealthiest man in the world. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.